She's a busy life. Welcome, Danielle.
Thanks. I'm excited to be on the Dominate Your Day podcast.
Thank you. Danielle, I was just looking at your LinkedIn. Oh my gosh, you have almost 30,000 followers. How did that happen?
It's an interesting story because I kind of say that I was an accidental entrepreneur. I found myself in a situation in 2020 where a series of life-altering events kind of took place, and at one point, the company that I had been with had been acquired by a larger organization, and it became a very toxic work culture. And so I ended up leaving the company after 7 years. And I said, well, I really need to take some time to invest in my personal brand if I'm going to be in this position where I'm going to be looking for a job. I hadn't been in a position of looking for a job for 15 plus years. I've always been recruited. And so I started to invest some time in developing my brand on LinkedIn and started networking and started posting. And eventually what happened is as I started to share content each day about leadership and sales and burnout prevention, and as my community started to grow on LinkedIn, people started to reach out to me for coaching.
Wow.
And then I started to do coaching, and then people started to reach out to me and say, well, can you come in and help our sales team with leadership development or help my sales team with time management and productivity? And so then that started to grow. But I say it's accidental because my initial intention of getting on LinkedIn was to help find myself a job, and I ended up creating one for myself.
Isn't that fun? I love that story because I think so many people think, oh, I've got to just do everything just right as I'm leaving corporate, or as I'm launching my own business, or as I'm in corporate and I'm trying to figure out my personal brand. So I love how yours was an accidental. Was that like 6 years ago?
That was in 2020,
2020.
which was interesting because in a sense it was accidental, and then in a sense it wasn't. And the reason why I say that is because, um, oh gosh, I want to say maybe 2010, I had created. I noticed that there was an opportunity for one of the companies I was working for a director of sales training. We really didn't have a formal sales training program at the organization that I was with, and so I created a business proposal and presented it to the president of the company, and they were working on creating a position for the national director of sales training. And I say that's interesting because it's what I do now, but instead of doing it for a company, I get to do it for several companies.
So you knew that a long time ago that that was in your heart and your passion, and then it just kept coming to you, right? Is that what happened?
I knew that leadership and teaching and mentoring was always been a part of my passion. It's one of the reasons why that was the aspect about leadership that I loved. I didn't always want to own my own business though. I really wanted to work for a company because of the security aspect of it,
Mhm.
but it ended up being the best blessing on how it all came out because now I get to work with so many different companies and so many different people, and I truly love what I do.
So, Danielle, you were in the medical sales. Is that where you were when you transitioned to your own business? Is that what you were doing at that point?
Yeah, so I started my career in copier sales, did that for a short amount of time to really get my grit when it comes to door-to-door cold calling and prospecting, and then I spent 15 years in medical sales, most recently where I was a Fortune 500 senior sales manager for a medical aesthetic organization.
So, what happened? How did you make this transition? Was there a something that just caused you to want to pivot? What happened during that time?
Yeah, so it was in 2020. I mean, many of us went through change in 2020. I mean, there was just definitely not just me. There was all of us that went through change. For me, it was a series of events that took place within a 6-month period. The first one was my husband had just served a deployment in Iraq. And so he came back in January of 2020. And when he left, our twin boys at the time were 1.5 years old. So
Um,
they were sleeping in cribs and they were learning to say their first words and they were learning to walk. And all of a sudden he comes back and he is, our twins at the time are then 2.5 years old and they're sleeping in toddler beds and formulating sentences. And to his surprise, they have opinions and what they want to eat, what they don't want to eat. And so that was really a big shift for us. It was definitely hard with him being gone, just the demands of being the primary caretaker while
Mm.
the demands of having a high pressure job. But it was really difficult with him coming back in and trying to integrate into our own rhythm and system. And I was used to making all the parental decisions, and now we're trying to figure out how do we do this together.
Right.
And then that was January. And then in March, unfortunately, March 8th, I unexpectedly lost my mom. My mom had passed away,
Mm.
and she had passed away from suicide.
Mm.
And as I was planning her celebration of life and just recognizing her, a week later, while I was supposed to go to California to go have her celebration of life, is when the pandemic hit and the world had shut down.
Mm.
And so as I'm trying to cope and grieve with this process of losing my mom into such a horrific way, the pandemic shut the whole world down, and there was a lot of uncertainty and scariness about that. My kids are immune compromised with specific respiratory issues, so we were all trying to navigate that. And then the company, just a couple months later than that, the company that I've been with had been acquired by a larger organization. The culture had shifted; it became a toxic work environment, and I ended up leaving the company after 7 years.
Wow.
And I believe that each of those events played a very critical role in where I'm at today. And the reason being is because I had tied so much of my identity to my job title, my income,
Mm.
Fortune 500 senior sales manager. I was region manager of the year. And I had tied so much of my identity to these titles and accolades that I had lost a part of who I was in the process. And so when I found myself looking for a job, I didn't know who I was. I had lost so much of my self-esteem. I felt like, who am I without any of this stuff? But each of those events really played a critical role in shaping me into where I'm at today.
I want our listeners to hear this. Some of you are going through loss. Some of you are going through a toxic environment. Some of you might have a husband that's been deployed or in another country right now, and you're trying to manage kids. But what I hear you saying, Danielle, that I think is so important, sometimes it's the hardest moments in life that bring us the best results later on. I see one of the things we talk about here at Dominate Your Day is living your day by design instead of by default. And the things I was hearing you say were, your title and being this sales, and everything was wrapped up in that. And then when that was away, you kind of had to go find her and
Mhm.
find your voice. So how did you do that? Who helped you? Who did you surround yourself with? Because I think that's where women in the workplace right now are overwhelmed because there's just so much coming at them,
Mhm.
and finding a support group, finding a coach, a counselor, a mentor. Who helped you? How did you kind of navigate those waters?
Such a great question because, we can either be in a position where we become victim of our circumstances, or we look at the circumstances and we say, how can these events that have taken place shape us into the person that we want to be tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the exercises that I talk in my book, Unstoppable Grit. But one of the things I talk about is, in that time period when I lost my mom and I was writing her obituary, it really was a point of reflection when I started to ask myself, gosh, what would people write about me when it comes time for my passing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because at the end of the day, like, there's so much emphasis that we put in on our title and our income and our work and what we do, but that's not always what we're going to be remembered for. I don't want to be remembered as, oh, my mom was a hard worker, or my mom was, always gone all the time, because I was at one point I was traveling a lot. I do want to be known for having a strong work ethic because I think that's a great characteristic to be role model for my kids,
Mm-hmm.
perseverance and grit and determination. But I want to be remembered for being a supportive and loving mother. I want to be known for making a positive impact on the world, and really what I want to be known for is helping people see the potential in themselves
Mm-hmm.
so that they feel valued within themselves without seeking outside validation. Like, how can they feel valued within themselves so that they can build their own confidence. And that was so one of the first steps that I took in really helping defining and getting clarity in what I wanted in my life and my career was I went on Facebook
Mhm.
and I said, if there was 3 words that you can describe me, what would it be?
Mm.
And I took all of those words and I made a word cloud of it because I was at a point where I was feeling very defeated. I felt deflated. I felt, um, a lot of low self esteem that I was lacking. And so I made a word cloud of it. And that was kind of like my daily reminder of like, this is what people are seeing in me. How can I see the same within myself? And then I wrote my own obituary. And I
Mm.
wrote it from the perspective of my family and friends, and then a separate obituary from the perspective of my colleagues and my
Mm.
coworkers. And it really helped shape this perspective for me on how do I want to show up in this world.
Mm. And be your authentic self, not something that somebody told you were going to be. Or so you kind of had this reckoning of finding yourself and really getting that out. And I love how you went out to Facebook. This is one of the exercises I do with my clients is ask 10 people. What's one word? And I love that. That's a great action item for people watching this today to do on their social channels or just in an email. What kind of words came back for you that were you're like, wow, because usually there's some that are the same, right?
Yeah.
And then some that were different. What kind of words at that time were coming back? Do you remember?
So a lot of them were, perseverance, determination, grit was one of them. Um, Empathetic. And I think and it's interesting that empathy was one of those because it's definitely a core value. And I think that I've learned more and more over time that, you find out what your core values are when you see people not doing it. And that's what really irks you. And you start to realize, ooh, it irks me because that's one of my core values and you're not in alignment with one of my core values. And empathy is one of mine. Um,
Mm.
a lot were related to being very, like, uplifting towards other people, supportive, kind, uplifting to other people. One of my, if you ever read the book by Dr. Gary Chapman, The 5 Love
Yes.
Languages.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so my primary love language is acts of service.
Mm.
And the secondary is quality time, which is one of the reasons why I love coaching so much the way that I do is because I really enjoy the intimacy of coaching and helping and really being in a servant leadership position where you're serving the other person and helping the other person achieve their goals. So that's where it was alignment.
And I love that your book name kind of came out of that. Was that intentional or was that just one of those things you'd been looking at your word cloud and looking at, inspiring grit, all those things, and then you became that. You became that person that other people saw.
I believe that I've always known that I've had a lot of determination and perseverance because of some of the challenges that I've experienced throughout my upbringing. But I never really put grit as one of the words to it. But it was interesting of the people that were the preliminary readers of the book. They all just kept saying like, your story and what you teach is a lot about how to be gritty. There's this amazing TED Talk out there by Angela Duckworth, and she talks about what's the difference of those that succeed. It's not always IQ. A lot of people will think, well, if you're really smart, you're going to be successful. And that's not always the case. It's really, do you have the passion and perseverance towards long-term goals? Do you have grit?
Mm.
And that's really, but at the end of that phenomenal TED Talk that she has, she says, but people always ask, how do you get gritty? And so that's kind of where my book comes into play, which is it's an extension of a lot of her research, which is here's how the steps that you can take to get gritty. It's first, really, how do you identify and get clear on what your goals are?
Mhm.
And get clarity on what you want. And it's not necessarily what society tells us success should be, but what does success mean on our own terms?
Mhm.
And then how do you create a plan and a structure to help you get to achieve your goals? So, how do you get clarity? How do you put structure in place? And how do you be consistent on that to ensure that you're getting to where you want to be?
So how long has the book been out, and what are you seeing as a result? What do you hope that when people read this that they take away from it? And you might have some great resources of people that have reached out and told you what has changed in their life since, and I'd love to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the book came out February 20th, 2024. So it came out, it hit bestseller for career advice for women in the workforce and work-life balance. So there's, you know, dedicated chapters in there about how to define success on your own terms. There's dedicated chapters in there on how to build like a career and life that you love. There's a lot of strategies on how to overcome burnout, being a military spouse and a mom of twin boys and very career driven. Burnout is very easy to get sucked into.
Mhm.
But I believe that there's definitely, if there's, within the book, each chapter is a story of a particular, an event that happened to either me or one of my clients.
Mhm.
And it talks about the story. Then it talks about what were the lessons learned along the way. And I believe what's the most important in reading this book is what are the practical strategies that the reader can apply to their own life.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't suggest that everybody, I wouldn't suggest the reader say, okay, I'm going to take all of these strategies and apply them to their life. No, what are maybe like 2 to 3 strategies that you can take and really make a meaningful difference in your life? And so that's why I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a story and here's some great wisdom that was learned along the way. It's like, what are some things that we can actually make some real changes in people's lives?
So, what things are you hearing now since the book's been out? And people, was there one favorite chapter or one thing that you're hearing more about than other chapters as you get these modules out there and these stories out there?
I believe the overwhelming response that I'm hearing from the readers that was quite surprising was they appreciate the vulnerability in the book.
Mm,
And I believe that why that is resonating with a lot of people is a lot of us are suffering from a lot of the same challenges.
mm,
There's high demand of, especially for women, I would say there's this demand of performing at work, but also the demand of the reality that we are majority of times the primary caretakers of our kids. I mean, my husband's very involved, but it's majority of the time me taking the doctor's appointments and doing the school activities and things along those lines and sports. And so, they appreciate that they feel like there's somebody that can relate to
yeah,
how they feel.
yeah.
There's a lot of relatability in the book. There's a lot of vulnerability that people are saying. I'm so glad that you were just so vulnerable in some of these stories because I keep hearing this like I've felt this same way too, but either I didn't know anyone else had experienced it or I've never heard anybody else talk about it.
Mhm. And
Um,
I think, and two, you're bringing up something that I see a lot is walking around with the mask on. I'm okay. I'm okay. Everybody looks like they're okay. But deep down inside, I don't even know what I feel right now because I'm so overwhelmed or burnt out or I've got all these issues. And being able just to say, hey, I need a minute and I need to figure out what my feeling is and be able to share it with somebody. And what you did was do that with your stories in your book, it sounds like.
Yeah, and you know what? You're right. It's it on especially, and I there's a chapter that talks specifically about how social media plays a role in this comparison trap that we get into,
Mhm.
where a lot of people will look at somebody and they'll look on social media and they'll be like, "This person has it all together," and I'm going, "Well, you're." First off, they're only seeing the great side. Like they're only posting
Mhm.
pictures of them smiling with their kids. They're not posting pictures of them in their pajamas on the couch, like totally exhausted at the end of the day with 5 loads of laundry on the floor. No,
Mhm.
that's so. And a lot of people come to me and they're like, "You look like you have it all together." And I'm like, I talk about the times where I experienced severe postpartum depression after the birth of my twins. In fact, I was hospitalized multiple times for dehydration because I wasn't taking care of myself. I talk about the time of when I was in a very toxic work environment and like how I approached it and what I learned of what to do and not to do when you're in a toxic work environment and talking about the times of how social media has played a role in self-esteem,
Mhm.
lack of it and ways to I say take the remote control and get control of it.
So pick one of those, toxic environment or social media, and let's go deep.
Mm. Ooh, okay.
You can talk a little bit about both because I think our listeners want to hear, right? They're busy, busy moms and
Mhm.
they're high, high impact leaders. What kind of tips did you learn about toxic environment? How did you get through a toxic environment?
Let's talk toxic environment,
Yeah.
because I believe that, and I, toxic environment can be a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people, but ultimately, I feel like if you are in a position where you're feeling burnt out, overwhelmed, and stressed, then there's some toxicity that's there. And that could be self induced. I want to take some accountability on that. Or it could be uh, uh, the environment, or it can be a combination of both.
How did you get out of that? Because I know I work with a lot of organizations on when we're bringing in topics, well-being and mindset, and really taking the responsibility ourselves to see what's inside. And like you said, there's probably a combination of both, but how did you manage that when you were getting through a toxic environment?
I believe that in any situation where you're feeling like you might be in a toxic environment, there's value in getting an outsider's perspective, because a lot of times we're so close to the situation that it's hard for us to see from the outside what can be contributing it and what are the steps to take to get out of it. Or to not even, maybe you want to stay in the company, but maybe to change the outcomes of what the environment is. And so, first, I would say, um, one thing that I would recommend is, and I talk about this on in the book, but I say grab a piece of paper and write a line down the middle. And on one side of the piece of paper, write down all of everything that you love about your job. Like, what are the roles, the responsibility, the people that you enjoy working with? Like, what are the tasks that you enjoy doing with that you love about your job? And on the right side, what do you not like about your job?
Mm,
Maybe it's individuals, maybe it's
mm,
specific roles, responsibilities, and tasks. And then among that right side, what is in our control and what is outside of our control?
mhm,
I may not be able to control, well, I can in one ways, but let's say I have a manager who is, or let's say I have a colleague who is just negative and gossiping all the time.
mhm,
That is definitely influencing my own mental, emotional well being in my current role. So, among that individual, what's in my control is I could possibly limit my conversations with them,
mm.
or limit the time of day or hour of the day that I speak with them, or choose to interact with different people. So, I think that if you take the time and you really put yourself in a quiet room and take the time to write down these, it's going to help provide some clarity. And then from there, align yourself with a mentor or invest in. I think a mentor is valuable in the sense of there's a mentor within the organization that you work with, and they can mentor you on like what does progression look like within the company and understanding the intricacies of the organizational structure. However, the disadvantage of having a mentor specifically in the company is you really can't be 100% candid
Right.
and be vulnerable about what you're experiencing. And that's where investing in a coach can be very, very valuable, because it's a confidential, like I have each of my clients and I sign confidentiality agreements. Anything that we discuss is
Mm,
confidential. And having that safe space to be 100% vulnerable and say, like, look, I do not like my manager. This is why. This is what they're doing. And then we talk through how to approach it and respond is extremely valuable, because you don't ever have to worry about the repercussions of what someone may think of you in the company that you're with.
I think that's such great advice. And I think one of the things we look for is who's your best friend at work, because sometimes it could be your mentor, but somebody you can find that you trust, that you can go and say, "Oh my gosh, I just had the most horrible conversation with so and so, and I just need to vent right now, and I need you to listen. I might not need you to tell me anything except just to listen. And that's what it is, that verbally
Mhm.
getting it out and sharing that. And I think having a mentor, a coach, a sponsor,
Mhm.
somebody that you totally trust. And I love the confidentiality. That is a huge piece of coaching and leadership
Mhm.
with people. So one of the things you said that I want to make sure our listeners hear is that it was draining to be around negative Nelly, whoever she was, gossiping. I have found myself in my past career, different roles where I just was people pleasing, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
being around those people, and I didn't realize that I'm the sum of the people I hang out with.
100%.
And so I think your recommendation of sitting down and thinking about it, who am I hanging out with and who is draining me? Who are the people that are bringing you energy? And how do you get yourself in the proximity of those people and help you be your best self? So it sounds like you did a lot of that as you were in that transition,
Mhm.
reaching out and asking people. As we get ready to close out, anything that's coming up for you now that Danielle, that you're thinking about that you want to make sure our leaders hear, our listeners who are leaders hear from you as they're in either a toxic environment or just overwhelmed or burnout, or they're just saying, I don't think I have an ounce of energy left today
Mhm.
to give to one more person. How do I get through that? Anything coming up for you as you think about
Yeah.
what you've learned and how you're helping others?
I believe that there is power and vulnerability in the workplace.
Mm.
And as a leader, for the leaders that are out there, take the time to sit down with each person on your team and really ask them. And I like to ask questions that are open-ended and quantifiable. And what I mean by that is ask them, what are the 3 time suckers in your day?
Mm.
What are the 3 ways that what are maybe 3 barriers that I can remove for you right now that are going to help you be successful? What are your 3 career goals? I like to be quantifiable because a lot of times if you put a specific number on it, it encourages them to really think a little bit deeper. If I just say, "Well, what are your challenges?" They're like, "Oh, well, it's this." It's like, "No, what are 3 to 5?" Like, let's be specific on them.
Mm.
What are the 3 time suckers, or what are 3 different ways that I can support you?
I love that. And I reason I love that, and this is part of the coaching that we teach for leaders is our your people aren't going to trust you until you give trust. And the way you give trust is asking questions like that. How can I support you? How can I serve you? What do you need? What barriers can I remove from you? And those questions were wonderful. I think that's a great tip.
You mentioned something about trust.
Yes.
And one way of building trust is to have those vulnerable conversations. And another way to build trust is to be vulnerable as a leader. I believe that one of the mistakes that I made as a leader early on in my career is I kind of felt like I needed to have everything put together and be this almost, I have it all put together. I'm here to support you all. But what I found through my experience of being a leader, and I had been in it for a more period of time, is the times that I would sit down with my team and be like, guys, I don't know how you guys are feeling, but like I'm exhausted and I'm burnt out and I am overwhelmed and something is not working right now.
Mhm.
And they're like, "Oh, I'm so glad you said something."
Mhm.
Because I've been feeling the same way too. And it opens up this dialogue for us to say, what's working? What's not working? What can we do differently? Because if I'm feeling this way, I'm thinking you may be feeling this way too. But vulnerability starts with the leader being vulnerable first.
Absolutely. And I love that. I think one of the questions I heard was two leaders yesterday. I said, how are y'all doing? Tell me a feeling. And they were both going, change fatigue, and then they would
Mm.
say, oh, me too. And because we're not used to sharing our feelings, it's just so powerful. So I love that you asked those questions. So Danielle, is there anything that you can tell the audience of how they can find your book, how they
Mhm.
can find you? What would be the best way for them to reach out if they want to follow you on LinkedIn or other places?
Yeah, so the book is Unstoppable Grit: Break Through the 7 Roadblocks Standing Between You and Achieving Your Goals. And it's available at any retailer, but Amazon's always great because it always delivers next day.
Yes.
So it's available on Amazon. And in the book, I really provide readers with the strategies to break down those barriers, to help them define what success means to them, to overcome burnout and feel like they can build a career and life that they love. So it's a lot of practical strategies that are in there, but stories along the way that are relatable, I'm sure, to a lot of people in different ways. And then the best way to follow me and find me is LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. So Danielle Cobo, that's Cobo.
Okay, Danielle, one last question. What is the way that you dominate your day?
Ooh,
One
I
key
am
tidbit.
yep. I believe, okay, here. I believe that the first hour of your day sets the intention of your day.
Mm,
So I dominate my day by protecting my first hour. I don't
mm.
go on social media. I don't take calls. I don't check emails. I don't do any of that because all my husband does this. I'm calling him out. Sorry, husband.
Uh-oh.
Uh, but the other day he's like, it's early in the morning. He opens up in his email and he's like, oh, something just went wrong on my job site. And he's getting all flustered. And I'm going, that's how you're starting your day, with overwhelm. Like,
Mhm.
I start my day in the morning. I wake up before my kids wake up. I light a candle so it
Mhm.
smells good in my house. I live in Florida, so we don't have a fireplace. So I turn the fireplace on YouTube with jazz music.
Oh, I love that.
And then and I make myself a cup of coffee and I just kind of sit and hang out with my kids. And so I create a very relaxing environment for the first hour of my day. And then I go for a walk and I work out and then I get ready for work. But I'm a big believer that if you want to dominate your day, then you are intentional about the first and the last hour of your day.
Love it. Great advice. Wow, Danielle, thank you for such a great commentary today of your book and your lessons learned. And I'm sure that many of our leaders will take this and want to reach out to you. So thank you for being here today. And thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
vulnerably. We appreciate it. Thank you.